Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new here. Today I will be doing my January 2025 wrap up. First monthly wrap up of the year, and let me tell you, oh my god, my reading in January was so good. I read 14 books, which is crazy for me because that is a lot for me. 4 of the books out of those were manga, and then I read one novella. So I did read a few shorter books this month, but I read 10 novels in total in January, which is still amazing. And not only that, but a lot of the books I read this month were so good, at a few 5 stars, a few 4 stars as well, and a few 3 stars. So nothing was below a 3-star rating for this month. The worst experience I had this month is I DNF'd one book, but that's about it. It was just overall a great reading month, and I hope every single month in terms of reading for me throughout this year will be on this level where I read this many books in one month. But we'll just see how it goes. But this month, oh my god, was so good. I have all my thoughts written down and scripted. I actually just got this reading journal where I can put all my book reviews in, so I will be referring to this journal while talking about these books because I have all my thoughts about these books written in here. And yeah, I'm really excited to be using it. This is totally not sponsored, by the way. I just wanted to talk about it because it's such a pretty journal and it's been so useful. I got it from the Quirky Cup Collective. They're like a small online business, and these journals really took off on TikTok, which is where I found it. So yeah, really looking forward to referring to this thing throughout this video. But with all that being said, let's just get started. So I did end up finishing the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. I read the first book, The Cruel Prince, last month in December, and I just pretty much binged this whole series throughout January. So I'm glad I knocked one series off of my TBR. I also did read the novella, which is The Lost Sister. This was actually my first book of 2025, was this novella. And this novella was just fine. We follow one of the main characters, Jude's sisters, and things that were going on with her in the first book that we didn't get to see. And I just thought it was fine. I really came to hate her sister, whereas I felt indifferent to her sister in the first book, but this novella, oh my god, it made me full on hate her. Like, you're supposed to hate her, but I really ended up hating her. So yeah, this one was an experience. It was just fine, 3 stars. And then I moved on to the other novels in this series. So The Cruel Prince follows Jude, who is taken in by a fairy man after he murders her parents. He takes her and her sisters to the fairy realm, where he raises him among the fairies. And being one of the only humans in this realm, Jude and her twin sister are constantly bullied by their fae peers. However, Jude is determined to find her place within the fairy realm and prove that she's worthy of their acceptance. I really did like The Cruel Prince, but I feel like as the series progressed, it just went downhill for me. And for that reason, it's horrible to say this, I feel so sad about it, but I do regret continuing on with this series. Even though I didn't know how it was going to end, I just feel like the ending of the series did not give really good payoff. It made me feel like I really wasted my time on this series. The Wicked King overall was good. In this book, we really do see Jude grow and become more accepted by the Fae and go through a lot of trials in order to gain that acceptance. Because this series is sold as a romance from what I've seen in reviews, but it really isn't. I feel like we barely ever see Jude and Cardan in the same room together. And in those moments where they are together, like in the same room talking, they're suddenly all up on each other, and I just feel like their relationship went from 0 to 100 so quickly and so suddenly, and there was none of that pining in between that I love in romances so much. So I felt nothing for their relationship, honestly, and I really wish that others who have read this series would not call it a romance, because it really isn't. Like, a lot of people call this series a romantasy, but in my experience reading it, it really is not. The romance is way more of a subplot, which is fine, but I feel like I went into this series with the wrong expectations regarding the romance, because it really is not a romance, because the romance is not the forward focused plot of the series, and the two love interests are they barely talk to each other. So like, why should I feel for them? It was just really confusing. The Queen of Nothing was definitely the worst book out of this series. I feel like it didn't tie up any loose ends in regards to the plot. It ended so abruptly, so I just felt no payoff for the progression of the plot at all, and that was so disappointing. And another personal problem I had with this series is the writing. I just feel like Holly Black's writing is not for me. A lot of the writing is vague and focuses too much on being flowery, and that's just not the kind of writing style that I gel with. And I specifically felt like the dialogue made it seem like these characters were always talking in riddles. Like they would say so much without saying anything at all. There were so many moments where I was like, what the hell are you guys talking about? You're just saying words, but what do these words mean? Like, what are you saying? What is your point? It was always so confusing. I could never follow along with the dialogue. So the writing just did not flow for me. There were numerous times where I had to reread whole paragraphs because I could not understand what was being said. I think the characters are the strongest part of the series. I did love them all individually, specifically Jude, our main character. She is really what kept me reading this series. And I did also love how the Fae in this series are not your like easygoing Fae that we see in a lot of Fae books nowadays. They are actual brutal and cunning Fae. And since Jude was raised among them, even though she's a human, she really was influenced by their brutal personalities and took on a brutal personality herself, which made her become a really morally gray character, and it made her so interesting. So I gave The Wicked King 4 stars, and I gave The Queen of Nothing 3 stars. Overall, this is a 3-star series for me. It was just fine, but I feel like it left a lot to be desired, so I probably will never go back to it. I would recommend it if you're into Fae series, but there are definitely better Fae books out there. Moving on to my next read, I actually reread one of my favorite books, and that is One Small Thing by Ouran. This was my second time reading this, and I loved it just as much as the first time I read it. So in this book, we follow Beth, whose sister was killed in a car accident a few years ago. And because of this, her parents are very strict with her out of fear for potentially losing a second child. And feeling suffocated by her parents' rules, Beth decides to rebel, and she goes out to this party where she meets this guy named Chase, and she has an instant connection with him. Chase ends up enrolling in her school, and it's then that she finds out that he was the one who ran over her sister years prior. And Beth knows she's supposed to hate Chase, but she cannot help the pull that she has towards him. And she wants to give him a chance, even though her friends and family think that she should hate him because he caused the death of her sister. So forbidden romance is one of my absolute favorite romance tropes. So this book has it, and it does it so well. I love the angst and the sneaking around, and that happens a lot in this book. And I found it beautiful that although Chase caused Beth's sister's death, Beth really takes a chance on him, and she really sees him for the compassionate guy that he is. Even though everyone around her just puts him down because of the fact that he caused this accident, she really looks what's deep into his heart and just loves him for who he is, and it's so freaking sweet. And because every single character just like rips on him and puts him down constantly, you will come to hate every single character in this book besides Beth and Chase. They are all terrible because of how insufferably judgmental they are. And they all treat Chase so horribly because he caused this accident. And it always boggled my mind because it was an accident. He did not mean to run her sister over, and yet they all treat him like he's this malicious killer. And it's really ironic because they all condemn Chase for being like a terrible person, but yet a lot of them just bully him. So that in turn makes them terrible and judgmental people. So like, who's the actual bad guy here? It's definitely not Chase. It's all these people who like refuse to give him a chance. This book really goes to show who the actual toxic people are, and I actually really love that aspect about it. I love the romance between Beth and Chase and how their grief over her sister's death really brought them together, and Chase was actually able to help Beth overcome the grief of her sister's death and be there for her and support her. And Chase is also really introspective and realizes the mistake he made because he chose to drive really recklessly, which caused the accident, and he does a beautiful job at showing Beth just how remorseful he is. He takes accountability, and I think that just goes to show the true nature of his character. Also, this book had really poignant commentary about virginity and the pressure that young people can have to lose it so early, which is something that Beth is currently going through. And she's having doubts that she did it at the right time. And I like the fact that she struggles to decide if she loves Chase for him or for the fact that she lost her virginity to him. So she's afraid that she only has that connection to him because he was her first. And I especially like exploring this in a young adult book because this is something that actual teenagers go through. And I know for a lot of people, the exploration of sex in young adult books can be very off-putting, but I actually think it's so important because it definitely is something that young people go through and they feel a lot of pressure with it. I mean, I myself was a teenager and I experienced these same scenarios, so I know it's realistic. So I really loved that aspect about this book and the commentary surrounding young people and virginity. This was just such a great book. Love the forbidden romance so freaking much. I think it definitely is my favorite Aaron Watt book. I have enjoyed every single one of their books, but this one, man, I just connected to it so freaking much. It definitely made me cry. I tabbed it a whole lot upon rereads. So yeah, there were a lot of very, very memorable scenes in this one. Definitely read it if you haven't yet. This was, of course, a 5-star read for me. This next book is without a doubt going to be on my favorite books of 2025 list, and that is Lights Out by Nevessa Allen. I had been seeing this book going around on YouTube and like Instagram, so I was really inclined to check it out. And I did, and I am so freaking glad I did. Oh my god. Still cannot stop thinking about this one. So this one follows Allie, and she is an ER nurse, and she has a habit of scrolling through TikTok on her break and looking at videos of masked men thirst trap. And there's a particular masked man that she is obsessed with and has left numerous comments under his videos, stating how much she'd love to have his masked persona in her bedroom. At one point, she sends one of the masked men's videos to this guy she's been seeing, saying how she'd love for him to wear a mask as role play with her. So her fling shows this text to his roommate, Josh, saying like, can you believe this chick is texting me this? Like, what the heck? But it turns out that Josh is actually the masked TikToker that Allie is obsessed with. And it turns out that after Josh had a run-in with Allie previously, he was actually super into her. So when he discovers that she's been commenting on his videos saying that she would love for him to stalk her and show up in her room and like do this stuff with her, he's like, oh, she's actually into this. So he decides to break into her house and film one of his masked thirst traps there. And when Allie sees his most recent video, she starts to realize that the background of his video looks a lot like her bedroom. So they're eventually hooking up while Josh stays masked, and Allie's trying to figure out who is under the mask, not knowing that he's her ex-fling's roommate. This book was just so much fun. I adored the connection between Allie and Josh so much. They are some of the naughtiest characters I have ever read, but they are also so freaking adorable. Absolutely love the banter between them and their playful dialogue, and they are really supportive of each other and understand the tribulations that each other has gone through in their past, and they try to help each other through them, and they actually give their own perspectives on their situation that the other doesn't see, and that really ends up helping them. So I just loved the support that these two had for each other, and they are also great characters individually. Like, although Josh like stalks Allie, he's actually a really thoughtful and sweet guy. For example, as he's breaking into her house, he realizes how easy it is to get into her house, and he's like, damn, this girl, she needs a security system. Like, I should not be able to break into this house so easily. So he gives her a security system and sends it to her house. He also picks her up from work at one point. Like, he's just really thoughtful, even though some of his actions can be kind of questionable. He's actually a really considerate and sweet guy. And Josh is actually afraid because he's thinking deep down that he might be a terrible person because his father was a serial killer. So he's really terrified that he will eventually inherit some of those traits if he hasn't already. But I think that if you're questioning if you're a psychopath, then that alone means you're not a psychopath, because psychopaths don't question if they're psychopaths, because if they did, that means they're really being introspective on themselves, and psychopaths don't do that. So I think that alone, with him questioning, hey, am I a terrible person? Could I be a killer? That baby boy, that means you're not a killer. You're actually a good person. And he bonds with Allie's cat, and it is the sweetest thing ever. The fact alone that the cat in this book is so prevalent to the story really sold me on this. Like, I love the cat so freaking much. And Allie is a very strong character. Because she's a trauma nurse, she sees death almost every day, and we get to see how much of an effect that has on her. She's hilarious, and I love that she knows what she wants and she's not afraid to voice that. She's not the timid type of female character who like skirts around like intimacy. She will tell Josh, hey, this is what I want and you're gonna give it to me. I love that for her. I love her confidence. This book was humorously well written, and the spicy scenes were spicy. I love them all so freaking much. This one is the first in a series, and I will definitely be reading the second book. It is a companion series, so the next book will follow a character that we got to know in this book, but like completely different characters and relationships. So I am really looking forward to it. This one was a 5-star read, absolutely. I also tabbed this one up so freaking much. I just enjoyed every single second of it. It was a quick, easy read, and yeah, I am absolutely obsessed with it. And I will end talking about this one with saying that don't be scared about the stalking aspect of this book. Definitely, if stalking is something that triggers you, like, don't read this book at all. But it wasn't something that was ever sinister, based on the fact that Allie actually likes the fact that Josh stalks her. Like, she is pretty much consenting to him stalking her. Like, she acts like she doesn't want it, but in her inner dialogue, she states, like, this is what she wants it. Like, she's into it. Next, I started The End of Everything by Nate Johnson, and I started this book because my mom really wanted me to read it. So I was like, okay, I need to start this series like ASAP, because she's been telling me you really got to read this. So I started the first book, and Mom, if you're watching this, I am so sorry. I DNF'd this. I was not into it. So let's get into my reasons why. First off, the synopsis. So this one follows this group of kids and teenagers who are at this camp that is pretty sequestered from society, and the adult chaperones have to leave to check on a bus of counselors for the camp. Has not arrived yet, so they're kind of worried, so they venture out and try to see like what is up with that. And so the counselors leave the teenagers in charge temporarily of the younger kids while they're gone. But when the adults never return, the teenagers decide, hey, let's call 911 because we're alone and we're alone with these kids, we don't know what to do. And so they try to call 911, but the call never goes through, which is very odd. And eventually they get a radio signal, and the radio is telling them that a deadly epidemic has broken out, has killed a lot of society. And so now the oldest kids are tasked with having to protect the younger ones and keep them alive and survive through this epidemic. So the plot of this book had so much potential. I thought the synopsis of it sounded really interesting, and I would have loved to see where the plot went, but this is the reason why I DNF'd this. The spelling and grammatical errors in this book were so atrocious. There were spelling errors on every single page of this book. I am not even kidding. At first, I kind of tried to, get past that and ignore it, but I just could not ignore it anymore, and the spelling errors just really took me out of what was happening. And I had read Goodreads reviews about this book, because I usually do that with every book I read, just go on Goodreads, see what the reviews are. And the reviews had been saying that there are a lot of spelling and typos and grammatical errors in this book, and so that kind of worried me, but I figured, if it's been called out for having grammatical errors, then surely this book has been re-edited and republished if it's been called out this much. And so I took a chance on it, regardless of the reviews, and no, the book had never been re-edited or anything. The spelling errors are still there. This book clearly was not edited, which is a huge problem, because there is no way that there are this many grammatical errors and it's never been proofread. There's just no way. And this is going to sound harsh, but it's the truth. if your book has this many spelling and grammatical errors, why should I care about it? Like, if you clearly do not care enough about your book to make sure the writing is polished as much as it can be, that there's little to no spelling and grammar errors, then why should I care about it? Because you clearly do not care about your book if you're not going to edit it. Like, it's ridiculous. I would be so embarrassed if I published a book with that many spelling errors. I would feel like humiliated. I would take it down right away, edit it or re-edit it, and make sure all the errors are gone. I would never leave a book with this many errors up. It astounds me that this book is still published because it's unreadable. Like, I could not get through this. I had to DNF it just because of the writing. It was so bad. So that was disappointing. Really wanted to continue on with this one because my mom loved it, but I just couldn't. It was unreadable for me. So yeah, I will not be continuing on with this series. Next, I also did another reread, and I reread a few of the volumes from the Ouran High School Host Club series. This is a manga series that I have reread time and time again, and I'm currently in the process of rereading it. I've been picking up a volume here and there in between reading novels, and it's just been a great time. I don't think I'm going to talk about this one much until I finish rereading the whole series, but I will tell you, it is one of the best manga series ever, and if you're into manga and you haven't read it, which would baffle me because this is also one of the most popular manga series ever, then you should definitely read it. I gave each of these 5 stars. The whole entire series is a 5-star series, so each volume gets 5 stars because, yeah, love this series so much. Next, I can't believe I read this duology because I was not the hugest fan of the Folk of Air series, but I still did for reasons that I will explain, of course. But I read the spin-off duology to the Folk of Air trilogy by Holly Black, and that is The Stolen Heir and The Prisoner's Throne. So the reason why I decided to continue on to the spin-off duology, even though the Cruel Prince trilogy was really mediocre to me, is because this duology follows Oak, who we know from the original series, and he was actually one of my favorite characters in the whole entire series. So because this duology followed him, I thought I would really be into it. And I kind of was, but kind of wasn't. So yeah, let's talk about it. So on The Stolen Heir, we follow Oak, who is Jude's, who we know as the main character from the original trilogy. This is her younger brother, and it follows his journey taking down a rival court. He has to work with the court queen's daughter in order to take the court down, who is Ren, and he's known her since childhood, and through their journey taking down this court, he grows more and more fond of her. So Oak is a character that, like I mentioned, I've been fascinated with since the original series. He's someone that Jude and his sisters have felt the need to keep protective and have coddled him, and they've made sacrifices with him, which he in turn feels guilty about because the sacrifices that they have made for him have caused a lot of trouble for them. So he kind of feels like a burden to them, which is really sad. And because of their sacrifices, he feels like there's just so much expectations toward him, and so that's something that he has a lot of pressure with. And Ren is a really dynamic character who feels like she never belonged with her human family because she had one in the human realm, but she also doesn't belong with her Fae family either, so she's just in a really rough place. She's also faced a lot of abuse from her Fae family, and so there's just been so many instances where she has never felt loved, which is really devastating. But that's when Oak comes in, and I really did enjoy the romance between them because I think he really showed her the love that she was craving and deserved, and I think he was so caring towards her. He's such a romantic guy, and I really loved seeing that. I loved seeing them go from childhood friends to something way more. It was super sweet. And Oak really sees the good in Ren that no one else can see because she's the daughter of the enemy kingdom, and so he's able to see those good traits that she has and makes her feel seen and loved. But I have to say, The Prisoner's Throne went so downhill for me. What is it with the Folk of Air trilogy and this duology where the last book in the series just is so unsatisfying? I don't know. I don't know, but it's so frustrating. The pacing in the middle of this book was like torturous to get through. I seriously considered DNFing it, but I did not want to give up after going this far through this duology, so I like pushed myself through the middle. And Ren's character goes through a personality switch in this book that I didn't love. It really kind of ruined her character for me. I get that it was contributing to her character arc, but she was like a completely different character, and because she was a completely different character, that affected the romance between her and Oak to where it took a different turn that I just was not into. And again, like with the Folk of the Air trilogy, I just found the writing to be so hard for me to get through. It just did not make sense to me. Again, Holly Black's writing I think is just not for me, so that was also pretty disappointing. So yeah, this duology, it was just okay. It's like a 3-star duology, just like the first trilogy was. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about those books. The Stolen Heir was a 4-star, and The Prisoner's Throne was a 3-star for me. Next, I read 2 books in a series that were sent to me in exchange for a review because I requested them, so that was freaking awesome. And that is A Storm Rises and A Shadow Falls, the first and second book in the Bloodlines Legacy by Rose Garcia. This is a romantasy series that I was so into, and I've been really looking forward to talking about them, so let's get into it. Let me tell you what this series is all about. So this series follows Faye. I read another Faye series this month, 2 Faye series in 1 month. That is crazy. But yeah, this one follows Faye. And we're specifically following Evelyn, who is a princess of the ruling kingdom Strom. And although she is a princess, she longs to participate in the Summit Range Hunt, where the winner reaps the rewards of riches from the kingdom. And though already one of the elite, so Evelyn doesn't need the money, she's more so participating in the competition for the potential recognition as the winner. And we also follow Mateo, who is from the Sublands, which is the outcasted lands of this kingdom, and he longs to participate in the Summit Range Hunt in order to win the rewards of riches so that he can provide for his family and his people who are being plagued by a sickness. And Evelyn has learned to hate Mateo because the royals have come to hate the Sublanders because of their alliance with humans, which is really frowned upon. And in turn, Mateo and the Sublanders hate the Strom because of the terrible way that they treat the Sublanders. But Evelyn and Mateo come to get to know each other throughout the competition as they're working together, and they see each other for who they really are deep inside and grow to fall in love with each other. One thing that I absolutely loved about this romance is that Evelyn and Mateo went from making assumptions about each other to really digging down deep and seeing who the other person actually is. Evelyn sees how noble Mateo is for wanting to provide for his family and sacrificing himself in this competition, because the loser of this competition faces death and execution. So that is something that he is sacrificing, and she finds it like amazing that he would put himself at risk for death just to save his people and cure their sickness and bring home money for them. Like, she loves that about him. And Mateo sees that even though Evelyn is a royal and she reaps the benefits of being like in a royal family, her family actually emotionally abuses her, so her life is just not as it seems, and he feels terrible for her because of that. And I like how this knowledge of each other really brought them together. It was super, super sweet. Their love for each other was just so pure and beautiful, and I loved seeing it unfold. I found the writing and world building in this series to be really easy to grasp, which is good for me because a lot of the times with fantasy, sometimes I just never understand what's going on, but I could really understand what was happening in these books. I will say though that at times I forgot that this was a book about Fae. I feel like the Fae elements of the series is not very strong, because sometimes I would just forget, hey, wait, these are fairies I'm reading about. Like, they just kind of read as like typical human characters with like a bit of magic. It was only when it would mention that they had pointed ears that I would remember that they were actually fae. So yeah, that, I don't know if that was really a good thing, but it didn't bother me that much that the fae aspect of this book isn't like as prominent. I just love the characters and the world building individually. Every character was so well fleshed out, and I really cared about them, and I really just wanted them to succeed through their situations. The plot twists were insane. Like, there was more than one plot twist, and I kind of saw them coming, but yet they still threw me off, and that's what makes a really good plot twist. It really brought into question everything that happened in this book. Like nothing was as it seems, and I just ate it up so freaking much. It was so well executed, and it also made the plot make so much more sense. I loved everything new we learned in the second book, A Shadow Falls, and I liked seeing Evelyn and Mateo discover more about themselves throughout the sequel. But like I just faced with the Prisoner's Throne, Mateo's character has a personality switch, and I'm thinking that maybe that's just something that I am not into, because that's what brought this rating down for me in this book, because he just felt like a completely different character, and I wasn't really into that. Like, again, I know that it makes sense for his character arc, and I'm sure it will really make sense for his character arc in the third book, but I missed the way he used to be, and yeah, that was really disappointing. And the second book definitely felt like the middle book of a series where it's just a bridge to the third or the following books that are to come in this series. So it definitely was not as good as the first book, but it was still enjoyable, and I loved how this sequel introduced dragons. It gave me total Fourth Wing vibes, and I'm reading Fourth Wing right now, so that's something I'm really into right now. So yeah, I loved seeing that. I will definitely read more from this author. These were the first books that I had ever read from this author, and I definitely want to read more from her. She has a prequel series to these two books, and I for sure want to read those, as well as any other books she puts out, because her writing was great. The series was so engaging. Definitely check it out if you haven't yet, because it deserves more love. I gave A Storm Rises 5 stars and A Shadow Falls 4 stars, and I did get A Shadow Falls as an arc, and it should be out by now by the time I'm posting this, so yeah, definitely catch up on this series. It's a great one. And the last two books I read this month are part of a duology, and that is 1,000 Boy Kisses and 1,000 Broken Pieces by Tilly Cole. I had heard so many things about 1,000 Boy Kisses, so it had been on my radar, and I had been putting it off because I heard how emotional it is, and that was something that I was not in the mood for a while, but I finally decided to pick it up, and I loved it, and yeah, it definitely made me cry. So 1,000 Boy Kisses follows Poppy and Rune, who have been friends since they were 5 years old, when Rune moved from Norway to Poppy's town of Blossom Grove, Georgia, and he moved in right next door to her. And as the two grow up together, they fall in love, and Poppy was gifted a jar from her grandmother, where the agenda is to fill it with pieces of paper detailing every memorable kiss she has, and the goal is to fill it with 1,000 kisses, thus the title of this book. And Rune plans to help her reach that goal by giving her all of his kisses. Unfortunately though, when they are 15, Rune has to move back to Norway because his father has a job over there, so he has to leave Poppy. But they plan to still stay in touch, and they do for a few months until Poppy randomly ghosts him, and he never hears from her again. But 2 years later, Rune moves back to Georgia, where he runs into Poppy, and he figures out the reason why she ghosted him. I went into this book blindly, and I believe that is the way to do it. Like, I will be very vague when talking about this book, because there's a certain aspect about it, while though predictable, I feel like you should still go into it blindly, so I'm going to be careful while talking about this one. This might be one of the most romantic books that I have ever read. The way Tilly Cole writes romance is so vivid and stunning. I felt Poppy and Rune's connection from the beginning, and I honestly don't even know how possible it is for someone to love someone as much as these two love each other. It almost seems unrealistic. That is how strong the love between these two are. It's like, it's a soulmate bond, and that's just something you do not see every day. Or maybe I'm just being pessimistic, because I have for sure never felt anything like these two have. So I'm like, how realistic is this? How realistic is it to love someone this much? It's insane. And grief and sadness in this book was written so well. There is at one point where Rune is going through a lot of grief over something, and the way his pain is described through Tilly Cole's writing is so descriptive that it actually made my chest ache because I could just feel his pain so clearly with the way it was written. It was devastating. And I just wish I could say more, but you really do have to go into this one blindly. I will say though, I cried numerous times while reading this. The one reason that I did knock off a star for this one, because I gave it 4 stars, is because this one has the second chance romance trope, and that is actually one of my least favorite romance tropes, because I love seeing a romance, like a new connection between two characters build and grow, rather than see a rekindling of a previous relationship. So that was just a me thing. If you love second chance romance, of course you're gonna love this book, but it's just personally not something that I gravitate to. So I did knock it down a star for that, but I still loved it so much. And regardless that it was a second chance romance, I still felt for Poppy and Rune and enjoyed the progression of their relationship. The second book though, 1,000 Broken Pieces, oh my god, this was even better than the first book. I loved it so freaking much. I will say this one is really hard to talk about without spoiling 1,000 Boy Kisses, and I am going to be vague while talking about it, but I feel like with the way I'm going to describe this book, it will be easy to put 2 and 2 together with what 1,000 Boy Kisses is actually about. So I will say that if you plan to read 1,000 Boy Kisses, you might just want to skip over my review right here, just in case I accidentally spoil you, even though I'm not going to outright say what happens in this one. Just be wary of that. So if you want to skip through my review of this, I will not mind, and this is the last book I'm going to talk about, so you can just like exit out of the video if you feel inclined to. But anyway, I'm going to talk about it now. All right, so this one follows Savannah, who is Poppy's a younger sister, and it also follows Kale, and the two are forced by their parents to go on this grief counseling trip around the world to get past their traumas. And they are reluctant to go, but when they meet each other there, they feel like an instant connection to each other. And that connection grows as they become each other's support in getting through their grief. So since this book deals heavily with grief, it was just as, if not more emotional than 1,000 Boy Kisses for me. And I loved how the grieving process for both Savannah and Kale was not linear. They had a lot of ups and downs that they had to get through in order to really heal from their trauma. And I feel like that's so realistic, because grief will happen, but it's not something that will just go away after you heal. It's something that will follow you forever. You just have to learn to deal with it. And that's something that this book showcases, and I love that. Kale is someone who feels so angry over the death of his brother, and a lot of people can't see past his anger for who he truly is, except for Savannah, who recognizes that he's only angry because he's hurting so much. She's there for him through his vulnerable moments, and he supports her too, and it is the sweetest thing. Their unconditional love for each other was so freaking beautiful, and I loved seeing it unravel. It was just as romantic as Poppy and Rune's romance. I ate every single bit of it up. And these two they grow exponentially, and I felt so proud of them at the end of this book. They recognize their trauma and they move on from it, and that in turn makes the relationship grow even stronger because they become stronger as individuals, and I love that for them. The writing in this book also was just gorgeous, so well written. I definitely need to read more from Tilly Cole after reading these 2 books. I did read these books back to back, and that was almost a mistake because I just went through like a full week of feeling so many emotions. Like I was an emotional wreck after reading these, so they definitely affected me. So yeah, I gave 1,000 Boy Kisses 4 stars, but I gave 1,000 Broken Pieces 5 stars. They were just incredible. Definitely read them if you haven't yet. Okay, we did it. Those were all of the books that I read in January. Hopefully February will be an even better month. In February, like I mentioned in my February TBR, half of the month I'm just going to be spending catching up on the Fourth Wing series. I just finished the first book, my reread of the first book yesterday, so today I am starting Iron Flame, and then I'll get to Onyx Storm. So those books are going to take up a whole chunk of my reading for February, but other than that, I hope I can manage to read a bunch of other more books in February. We'll just see how it goes. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned and your thoughts on them. I would love to know. And I guess that's it for me for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with a new one really soon. Bye!